What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Johnny Mack here. Just wanted to give you a heads up that if you are looking for a community that is open to discussion as far as mentorship, conservation, the wild, becoming a better person, and all of that, there is a group for you on Facebook, and it is called Soul Seekers. Soul Seekers, we are all about making ourselves a better person. We're all about making sure hunting lasts for generations to come and encouraging people to get plugged in. Whether you are someone who has something to give or someone who needs to soak it up like a sponge, this is a community for you, and I strongly encourage you that if you're on Facebook to join Soul Seekers, and if you're not on Facebook, hop on there just for that group. It is only going to be as powerful as we all make it. And so just remember that life happens for you, it doesn't happen to you, and that you can't outgive good. You can't outgive good, people. I want you to understand that, and I want you to believe it, because when we believe that and we lead with courage and we lead with intention, lives are changed, lives are transformed, just like on this podcast, transformation through primal adventure. Be blessed. Enjoy this episode. Talk soon. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Soulful Hunter Podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mack. Through this podcast, I'm on a mission to transform lives through primal adventure and to spread my mission of mentorship as conservation. This podcast is powered by Washington Backcountry, a resource for all hunters, both new and old. To find out more about Washington Backcountry, go to wabackcountry.com or search for Washington Backcountry on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. The Soulful Hunter Podcast is also proudly presented by T&K Hunting Gear. If you haven't heard about T&K, then it's about time you do. I've been using T&K gear out in the field and on hunts and have fallen in love with their stuff. T&K is veteran-owned and 100% made in America using only American-made products. All their gear is covered under a lifetime warranty with no questions asked. If it breaks or fails, they will fix it or replace it for free. T&K is your resource for bino harnesses, bow slings, and a lot more amazing gear. For more information about T&K hunting gear, go to tnkhunting.com or search for them on Facebook and Instagram. I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Freedom on and stay soulful. The Soulful Hunter Podcast is also proudly presented by the Crazy Elk Company. Based out of the state of Washington with products made in America, they are providing solutions with gear to problems you didn't even know you had. Their tag wallet is one of those solutions, and I had the pleasure of using it on all of my hunts this last year, and it is now a mainstay in my kill kit. The tag wallet is a water-resistant zippered pouch that comes with its own reusable zip ties to safely and securely store your notch tag for quick and easy access. For more information, go to crazyelkcompany.com and use the code SOULFUL with a capital S to save 20% at checkout. Be blessed, everyone, and as always, stay soulful. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Soulful Hunter Podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mack, and today I am joined by a really fascinating human and just an awesome individual himself, Joe Kondelis of the Western Bear Foundation. He is the founder of the Western Bear Foundation, and this episode is dedicated all about bear hunting and conservation organizations and everything that goes along with it, because as I have dove deeper into the hunting world, the realm, the industry, whatever you want to call it, I see the flaws of how things are presented, and yet when you get down to it, you see how the sausage is made, and it's not always the most appealing. And so we're going to talk with Joe all about my journey of wanting to give back to conservation organizations, but not trusting organizations and having bad experiences with them. And we're not going to necessarily name names per se, or at least I'm not. However, we're going to talk about this and why the Bear Foundation is such a wonderful organization that I truly support to get behind, not only because of what it does, but also because the animal it represents. Because bears are so polarizing, and people attribute human characteristics to them all the time. And, you know, they're a predator, but they're they eat both meat and I'm losing my words here. My kids, if they were here, they'd correct me. Meat eaters and plant eaters. Anyways, let's get into this. Joe, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it. I love what you guys are doing over there, and I'm happy to be on.
Yeah. Oh man, I really appreciate it. It is so much fun having a podcast and getting to use this as a platform to make connections and build community. Because I just recorded an episode earlier today with a buddy over on the East Coast in South Carolina, and I was like, if it wasn't for podcasting, I never would have met him. And
Yeah.
he's the type of guy where he's like checked in on me, and I was like, man, I need to get you on the show. And so all of a sudden we just popped on an episode, and you can't outgive good. And when you lead with a heart of goodness and love and intention, it automatically resonates and returns, not because you do it out of the expectation of a return, just because you do it with the expectation or not with no expectation. Just say, I want to give, I want to love, I want to
Mhm.
treat others the way you want to be treated. I want to love others the way you want to be treated. I want to stand for things the way people would expect that you have a stance for. So, Joe, give a little background on yourself, how you ended up creating and founding the Western Bear Foundation, and then we'll dive into all the other topics from there.
Yeah, it's pretty bizarre story. I grew up in Southwest Montana, and you know, grew up hunting. My father and my grandfather and a hunting family, and so hunting was always, you know, a lot of the same trajectory a lot of people out west have as far as growing up with it. Um, and as I got growing up, we only deer and elk hunted and antelope once in a while when we got tags. And I was always kind of mesmerized by bears, and you just never seen them much. And we didn't hunt bears specifically. I remember my dad going on a few trips, and I never got to go. Um, so when I was in high school, my buddy and Joe and I started kind of trying to figure out how to bear hunt, and we were very poor at it. I guess we didn't have a lot of mentors in bear hunting, and we just went out and grinded it out and tried to figure it out on our own. And we hunted them like we did deer and elk, and it wasn't great. And it was in that process that kind of started the foundation for my thoughts on the Western Bear Foundation, was partly to try and get some uh, to have a community that bear hunters, especially new bear hunters, could look into to try and gain knowledge, because bear hunters are like trappers. A lot of us are really tricky with our information, and we don't like to share too much of it, and it's not as giving as a information sport, I would say, as others. And so I thought, man, if there was a way how we could not struggled through so much and reached out to people. And this was before the internet was really like crazy, so you couldn't get online and look at blogs or any of that stuff. And so I guess I struggled through that and ended up kind of learning quite a bit. And it was probably for the better. I learned on my own. And through the years of doing that, and then moving to Cody, Wyoming, and working down here and bear hunting down here, it just kind of stayed with me, like this thought of doing something for bear hunters and for bears. As I moved down here to Cody, I really was on the front lines of the grizzly recovery situation, and seeing what's going on with the grizzly bears in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem and the northern Continental Divide ecosystem. And I just thought, there's so much work being done for grizzly bears, but at the same time, many of the states in the West don't even know how many black bears there are in their state. And that really bothered me, because I was like, we have this tremendous animal, this great species here that we pay little to no attention to. We just take for granted that it's here. And bear hunters don't have a group out there specifically for them. There's a lot of sportsman groups out there that cover a lot of bases, but no one's really focusing on bear hunting and bear hunters and bears. And so one day I just said, to heck with it. I'm going to figure out what it's going to take to start this. And excuse me, I don't know nothing from starting a nonprofit, and I did some research and started filling out paperwork, and did all that stuff, got it all submitted, and we finally got our 501c3 status in 2007. And then from then on, it's been kind of a grind. We came out as Yellowstone Country Bear Hunters Association, and we're really just going to focus on Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming at the time. And we were growing a little bit, doing some small projects in the States, but nothing like we wanted to. And we ended up having to change our logo. And with that, we changed our scope to being the Western Bear Foundation. And working more on the Western United States, not specific to the 3 states around Yellowstone. Um, Doing a lot of work across the West, and even now, so we're trying to get projects going in Virginia and across the U.S. and not just in the Western United States. So, kind of an elevator quick pitch, but it's been an interesting 14 years of doing this. That's for sure.
You know, first off, I just want to acknowledge you and say thank you so much for the work that you are doing and taking a stand for an animal that needs someone to stand for them. I think, obviously, for the listeners, if you don't know, white-tailed deer is the most hunted game animal in the world. And it's easy to get behind that, or waterfowl, or elk, or like these cool, like really, when you see them, they're like, wow. Well, I come from a different area in this concept of like my first game animal, big game animal that I shot was a black bear. And I did it out of the necessity of that was the season in which I had available to hunt. It wasn't
Hmm.
that I was like, oh, I want to kill a black bear. Like, yeah, let's go.
Yeah,
I was like, and I'm going to say the typical hunter because I was like, when you think of hunting, you think deer hunting.
yeah,
You don't necessarily,
deer and elk. Yep.
yeah, and at least when I got into hunting, I was like, well, elk seems like it's really hard. Deer seems
Yeah,
like more manageable because I've never really even seen many elk, but you see deer driving down the road sometimes.
yeah.
Bears, you don't really see them unless
No, you don't.
you are intentional to see them. And so when I got into hunting and I realized that in the state of Washington you could hunt black bears starting August 1st, and I was a high school football coach, which gave me roughly 16 days to hunt when I wasn't teaching. I didn't have to take vacation time, and before high school football started. And so I was like, well, shoot. I always dedicated the first 2 weeks of August to going on backpacking trips. If I can backpack and carry a rifle, I get to kill two birds with one stone, and hopefully a bear with that stone as well. So,
Yeah.
I went down this journey not intending to hunt bear, but it turns out I almost feel like I'm a bear hunter more than anything else now.
Yeah.
And as I've gone down this journey, I've talked to a lot of people, and I'm like, "Hey, dude, why don't you hunt bear?" They're like, "Oh, I don't know, it just doesn't seem right." Or why don't you hunt bears? Like, I've tried hunting bear, but I've never seen one. Or, like all this stuff. And I'm like, man, the concept of bear hunting actually seems a lot easier to if you identify where they're going to be feeding at, you're more likely than not going to be running into them a lot easier. They don't spook as much as deer, elk do. They're the biggest, baddest thing on the mountain. And so it's really fascinating to talk about bear hunting, and I'm an advocate for it. I truly believe that
Hmm.
everyone who gets into hunting needs to start with bear hunting. I think it's a great opportunity to mentor somebody on a hunt. You're in good weather, you're in great terrain, you are not necessarily crushed for time because bear seasons are typically pretty liberal and long. And at the same time, you can, use your hunt to scout for other animals. So here I am just like, man, bears, it's fascinating. I had to overcome my own fear, and I was freaked out. My first night of being in the backwoods hunting bears, I was like, oh man, I hope a bear doesn't come into camp tonight. And I'm like, wait a minute, no, that sounds ridiculous because I'm here to kill one. So, okay, wait, no. Would it be better if it came into? Tonight? Would that make it, And so I had like this struggle within my heart and my soul because I was scared. I was truly scared.
Hmm.
And I carry that into my adulthood. Here I am, 36 years old. I was 31 at the time when I killed 5 years ago, I killed that first bear. And I remember walking up on it and being afraid to touch it. And all these emotions rushed over me. The point of this is that I fell in love with hunting more because I fell in love with hunting black bears.
Hmm.
I didn't fall in love with like specifically hunting deer. I fell in love with the concept of hunting because of what it did for me. And that's what also spurs the Soulful Hunter, is that like there's something more besides the act of finding an animal where it lives, killing it, bringing it home, eating it. That is all really cool, but at the same time, you also get to really challenge yourself, because to take down the biggest, baddest animal on the mountain is quite an accomplishment.
It's something that has always got to me to where, when you look at black bears in this country, and we've taken them for granted for a very long time for multiple reasons. They're one of the most prolific animals in the United States. They're super adaptable. Like, bears can live in Mexico, they can live in the Yukon Territory. Black bears can. They can live on the East Coast, they can live on the West Coast, and we almost have them in all 50 states. That's pretty unique for a species to be able to do that. Because of that, we take them for granted. Like, we don't have problems with black bears being numbers being reduced to a point where we can't hunt them, or where they're a protected species other than hunting regulations in some areas. Even the areas that are protecting them have larger populations in many states out west. So I think people take for granted that they're always here. They're an iconic species in this country. When you come across when the settlers came over and they started migrating from the East Coast to the West, and they're moving across, some of the greatest stories of these trappers and stuff involve bears, whether it's black or grizzly bear. And I'm like, they're the king of the woods, and in many areas they're the number one apex predator. And to me, hunting predators is so much more rewarding, I guess. And I love deer and elk hunting, don't get me wrong, and that's where I cut my teeth, started hunting. But I've turned myself into more of a predator hunter. I love their elusiveness. I love the challenge to hunting black bears. Black bears are individuals, which I really appreciate, because no two are the same. They
Yeah.
think like individuals. They don't think like a herd animal. And I really appreciate that. And you can have a black bear that does one thing one day and you think you got him patterned, and the next day he's going to do something completely different for no reason that you know of. And it's just such a challenge. And it's one of the most remarkable species when you really sit and start studying them and start thinking about their biology and everything. And that's what really made me fall in love with them, was to be a good bear hunter. I always tell people, like, they always want to know. And I said, well, first educate yourself on the species you're after, because there's a lot of guys that go out and try and hunt bears that really don't know much about them. They're just going to go try and find them. Those are typically not guys that or gals that stay bear hunters for very long, because they don't understand the species. You're not deer hunting, you're not elk hunting. And that was a trajectory that took me some time, is understanding the species. And when I did that, I grew a greater appreciation for the animal, like even more so than I already had, because of the science behind their denning and their hibernation, and how they live throughout the year. And it just really fascinated me. And I think that there's something primal that we get involved with when we're hunting predators. And granted, it's not always the sake of, well, they can kill me, but they can. You're hunting something that is another predator on the landscape, and it's a little more, the odds are a little more even in my mind.
Yeah. It I love that you said primal. The mission of this podcast is transforming lives through primal adventure.
Yeah.
And that primal mentality, this is the difference about black bear hunting. You can't just walk out in the back 40, sit in a tree stand, and expect to see a bear that
No.
day, over a weekend, over a
No.
week, over, you know what I mean? And so for you to actually identify how to kill black bears,
Yep.
it is a skill that transcends the deer hunting, the elk hunting. And they all have their own challenges, don't get me wrong. And however, to be able to, like you said, beat, and not that we compete against ourselves, but we're also competing against the animal, and to beat them at their own game. It's like, whew.
Yeah.
I
That's what it's always drawn me. Like, you'll go deer and elk hunt, and they all have their own challenges and skill sets. But like, to me, you're not hunting a herd animal. So you're hunting one individual on a landscape that's so vast that we can't cover it. And you got to find the right individual. You're trying to shoot a boar or an adult male, in most cases. And to do that and try and find them and try and pattern them or try and get on them in their own backyard. And you're just You think you're so great, and that, I don't know how many times I've been humbled by bears more so than deer and elk. And just about the time I think I got this so figured out, I'll have a year where I'm not seeing many, or I'm just not having good luck, and it brings you right back down to where, like, okay, I think I know, but I don't know enough, or I got too cocky with my skill set that I thought I could just not put in the work and do good. And so that's a one thing that's always drawn me to bears is their individualism, their uniqueness, and that they just don't, you're not looking for a herd, you're not looking for tracks, you're not looking, it's just one animal on a giant landscape that you're trying to find and harvest. So it's a unique challenge that I like to challenge. Um, I speak to primal too, because a lot of people always say, why do you hunt? And the easy thing to cop out. And I've always said this, I said, yeah, one of the main reasons is for me. That's one easy way. When you talk to an anti-hunter, it's like, well, yeah, I eat it. I eat the meat. And yeah, that's a big reason for me. But for me, it's more than that. And I think for a lot of people, if they really sat down, the reason they hunt goes beyond the fill in the freezer and goes beyond the challenge. It goes back to something that's in us that we don't quite understand, as far as like that getting right down to our instincts of being hunter gatherers and being out in the woods and feeling alive. Like, you don't feel alive any other time. For me, I feel most alive and most clear when I'm out in the woods. And so I always say, that's why I go more so than filling a freezer. That's a great gift that I get when I'm hunting. But like the other things that really hard to put your finger on, but I think most people, if they really boiled it down, would say that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've never shared this on a podcast. I've never shared this outside of the people that I was with on my very first bear hunt. When I shot my first animal, that bear, up until that point, I tried, I think deer sausage, and I think I had some deep fried breaded deer cubes, like a
Mhm.
backyard barbecue style. Up until that point, I never ate wild game. It wasn't, I wasn't raised in that household. It wasn't something that you can just go buy. And I didn't know people that hunted. And so I didn't have an opportunity to be like, hey, what does it taste like? So when I went out and started hunting, I, I think I really started for my soul, for myself. I was
Yeah.
more
Yep.
concerned. I was more concerned when I shot the bear to make sure the hide didn't rot than I was about the
Hmm.
meat, because
Yeah.
I knew that the meat was short term. You go through meat,
Hmm.
all of a sudden that animal's gone, but the hide, the skull, that'll last for potentially generations if you take care of it. And for me, I really, and I don't want to call it a trophy, but I do want to call it some sort of like remembrance, like to look.
Yeah. It's a memory of your hunt.
Yeah, but like more than that, it's like a
Hmm.
stepping stone to me coming into manhood, me coming into
Yep.
overcoming my fears. Like, hey, look at this. I
Yeah.
accomplished this. I did this. I can do this. And if I can do this, you too can do this. And I
Exactly.
and so but and so building off that, I truly believe that bear hunting, when you dive into it, it'll change your life, radically change your life. And the meat is good. I can't speak to Alaska black bears that eat fish all the time, because I imagine what you eat is what the animal tastes like. Um,
Bears specifically do that. They take on a little bit of what they eat, and so you hear this a lot of times from people that bear meat's bad, and unfortunately in Wyoming we're not required to take meat out of the field, which is something that we hope to maybe see changed one day, because it's really bad optics for bear hunters when we don't have to take the meat out of the field. It turns us into hide hunters then, whether or not we are. And I always take the meat out and we process our own and do it that way. But bears tend to take on a little bit of what they're sweeter when they're eating berries, or if they're eating fish, you can definitely tell. I still think there's a place for all of it, and there's ways to prep it and take care of it to where you can have good meat. But obviously an Alaskan bear that's eaten out of a stream, you're going to want to probably do a little bit more to that meat than you would a bear out in Washington that's been foraging on berries all fall, you know?
Totally. And so last year I had the opportunity to draw my very first spring bear tag. And so I was super cautious about eating bear that was eating grass, you know?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, I've only ever had these huckleberry bears, you know?
Yeah.
So what is this going to taste like? Am I going to enjoy it as much? And it turns out, dude, bear meat, whether it's spring or fall, is phenomenal.
It's good.
It's
Even the spring ones that are eating grass, I almost prefer. The meat's a little, they're coming out of their den, so it's not as tough if you get an older boar. But I definitely like a bear in the fall when it's got some fat on it and it's got, it's been eating berries. You got all that fat that you can render down and utilize. You don't get that in the spring as much. But yeah, like you said, it's one of the misconceptions with bear hunting, and it's something that we're trying to get this over this hurdle. A lot of guys bear hunt that have figured it out, like the meat's good, and they're kind of like, yeah, it's fun, it's great, and I don't tell anyone that because everyone thinks it sucks, so they won't come hunting. But also on the anti-hunter thing, I'm always trying to tell people, most bear hunters aren't out there just shooting for the hide. They eat the meat and they consume all the animal. They're using the fat, they have the skull, they have the hide, and they're doing stuff with the claws, and boiling down the bones for stock. I was like, you can use the whole thing like we do deer and elk just as well.
Yeah. It's really fascinating when I started diving into conversations with Clay Newcomb
Yep.
because Clay is doing things for bears that a lot of other people aren't because of his connection now with Meat Eater and,
Hmm.
him taking a stand with Guard the Gate of
Hmm.
what happened in California this year and state of Washington and bear hunting. Like 2021 rolled around and all of a sudden everyone was attacking bears.
It
And
was a stressful time for me. Yes, very much so.
yeah, it is super fascinating. So I feel like he's kind of putting bear hunting on the map,
Hmm.
and which is great. And it also needs to bring in bear hunt or the Western Bear Foundation and the concept of like, hey, hello, there's these animals and they need our time, our effort, our energy. And there's a lot of conservation groups out there that what you see is not what you get. And
Yeah.
we spent a lot of time talking about this off the podcast and kind of t- what I love about podcasting is I get to fill the waters out with people a lot, and
Yeah.
they do the same with me. I'm not saying I'm some God's gift to hunting or whatever, but I I believe in everything is relationship driven, right? And so if you can trust the person, then typically you can trust what they're also doing.
Hmm.
And I don't feel like I've been burned by two specific conservation groups that I will not do business with ever again. I will not support them. I do not, and it's not that I don't support hunting or conservation, but there's how things are done. If we are so concerned about the image of hunting and how it's portrayed, then how things are done to other hunters is extremely important as well. And we
Exactly.
can't keep isolating people or, you know, not following up. So, Joe, one of the things I love about you is that what you say is what you get. And so when we were talking about the financial aspect of Western Bear Foundation and there's a lot of concern about there are conservation groups out there that are referred to as green decoys, which I'm not exactly sure where that term comes from, but but what I've read or considered is that a green decoy is the whole what you see is not what you get. And
Exactly.
there's a lot of anti Second Amendment money coming from organizations that are anti Second Amendment dumping money into conservation organizations that are or man, I'm kind of hard for me to gather my words on this.
You're on topic, and you're on true to the point there. And what it's boiled down to is big business. These conservation groups started out with great intentions and still do a lot of good things, but what happened was with growth becomes less, I guess, guardrails to keep them within their scope, and really going back to their mission and their goals and their objectives. And then they end up looking back, and you've got an executive director and you got 30 employees and you're doing all this fundraising, and yeah, you know, some of it's going to the ground, but how much is going to that guy's salary? And so when you have to pay these big salaries and you got to pay these big bills that are incurred because you're a global organization now, you start taking money from people that'll give it to you, and you don't really care who it is. And that's something that has bitten a few of these nonprofits on the ass, is they have been labeled green decoys because money's coming from anti-second amendment groups. They're coming from anti-hunting groups that, you know, initially they'll write that check and give it to them, and the money's, maybe it's meant for the right thing or not, but at the end of the day, the company that they got that from is anti-hunting or anti-second amendment. And so one thing that I've had to be really careful with, because we don't receive a ton of money, and I've actually turned down checks from organizations because they don't fall in line with our beliefs, and I don't want to take money from a group that doesn't believe in us. And interestingly enough, I received a random check in the mail. This is a little anecdote. Didn't apply for a grant from this company or nothing. I got a check in the mail and never even heard of them. So I called a friend of mine that helps me vet a lot of these companies because he's in that space, and it was a foundation or a fund, and he did some research and he's like, I cannot find a lot. And so I called him. I said, hey, you guys sent me a check. You know, a lot of small nonprofits that had just taken that to the bank, and I said, I'm not going to do that. I want to know why you sent it to us and what it's for, and I want you to know about us, because a lot of people look at us and they say they're a bear hunting conservation group. They're probably anti-hunting. We couldn't be even farther from that. Like, we are so pro bear hunting, and we started this for bear hunters. And I wanted her to know that. And I explained it to her, and she's like, let me get back to the person that runs the fund. And, you know, at the end of the day, we ended up going with them because she knew who we were and she was okay with it. But that none of that happens anymore in the big space. And so we as sportsmen are being not tricked, but we're following blindly and not doing research like you do, to groups that we think are in our best interest or wildlife's best interest. And sometimes all we're doing is feeding the monster.
Yeah. It is, it's so sad because money makes the world go round currently. And so if you don't have money, it's hard to get things done, or it's hard to
It
have a
is.
voice if you don't have financial backing. And yet, when you take something from somebody or receive something from somebody, there's not many times in life where there aren't strings attached.
Exactly.
And this is like me being a school teacher. I pay into a union that my union directly um, goes against everything that I actually stand for and believe in. You know,
Hmm.
I have nothing against the people. I have no, I want to say this. You listen to this podcast, you could be a Democrat, a Republican, a independent, whatever. I have nothing against you because we're all human. We're all made in the image of God. We're all beautiful creation. With that, the Second Amendment also says shall not be infringed, meaning nothing should be infringed upon, and it is the right to bear arms, which is ironic because we're bear hunting and we're talking about bear arms.
Yeah.
But what a definition of arms is a projectile and the weapon that it shoots. It's not a musket. It's not a hunting rifle. It's anything. And we also have the ability for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if you are infringing on any of that for me, then you're going against my free will. And therefore,
Mhm.
I am infringed upon as a person, and I don't have the ability to pursue happiness and the way my life wants to go. With that being said, it's sad to see these organizations getting funded by companies or corporations and being lobbying against things that just directly affect hunting. You know, it's here in the state of Washington, hunting is a legislative and voter-based initiative. So
Mhm.
laws, you know, the grizzly bear reintroduction in the North Cascades here, and a lot of other
Yep.
things like King County in the city of Seattle has such a large population that, you know, people blindly follow things like the sheep of this
Yep.
world, and oh, we got to introduce grizzly bears because of natural habitat, and we can't hunt these bears because this is bad for them. Then they hear this on the news and, oh, sure, that sounds like a good idea. They vote against it, they vote for it, whatever it is, and all of a sudden, you as the hunter, the person who is the user of the land, the recipient of it, is standing here in the corner being like, "What the heck, man? What's
Yeah.
going on?"
It came right down to not that long ago with you guys in Washington in the spring season and they wanted to get rid of some of those. And it was literally like two people complained and they were so afraid of that. It's just that they wanted to shut down all the spring seasons and relook at the quotas and how many tags are given out. There's not enough free thinking in this world anymore. And it's because everyone's so tied to their phones and their TVs and social media that they don't have time to think for themselves, which is really a shame, which is why I encourage more people to get out in the woods where they don't have a phone that works, because you might find yourself thinking about things that you normally wouldn't. And that's what's happened with these groups. It's just turned into, I need money, 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 money. And I have this machine that I have to operate. And like you said, you cannot tell me that you're going to get money from an anti-hunting group or a non-Second Amendment group, and they're not going to want to influence your policy or your direction in some way, shape, or form. Why would they give you that money?
It's kind of
And it might
crazy.
not be now, it might be in 5 years, but you got to think that they're going to come a knocking one of these days.
Right. A frog in a pot of water, man. You crank that
Yep.
heat right away, it's jumping out, but you slowly infuse, all of a sudden,
Yep.
you got a dead frog.
Exactly.
And going back to the state of Washington thing, it is that one thing that made the news.
Yep.
All of a sudden causes everyone to look at bear hunting and think, "Oh, that's so horrible." Well,
Yep.
in the state of Washington, if you can over the counter buy 2 bear tags every year.
Yes. You
So
guys have more bears in that state than anywhere in the West, anywhere in the United States, almost, I think.
so yeah, and here it is that our spring season's a limited draw
Hmm.
to not just limited draw, but also limited within the state. Like only
Yeah.
certain units can get a tag. But, but the main non-hunting person, and I like to let's talk more about like the non-hunter versus the anti-hunter, because you're never going to change someone's mind. Their stance is their stance,
No.
but you can educate the people who are indifferent for them to then have a perspective. And so here it is, these non-hunters are like, "Oh, this is horrible." Well, did you know you could shoot 2 bears every year? "Oh, wait, you can?" "Yeah, because we have that many, and they're phenomenal," and it goes on. It's really fascinating. So let's turn it back to the Western Bear Foundation. We've talked about these organizations that you can't necessarily trust what they're doing, or you can ignore it. And I think that's ignorance is bliss, right? We just out of
Hmm.
sight, out of mind. I like what I had a fun time at the work party. We worked on this trail, we worked on a bridge,
Yeah.
whatever it is. Like I'm seeing it being applied in my local community, and therefore doesn't matter what the big picture is, I'm going to support it. What is the Western Bear Foundation doing for different states? How are you getting involved? Is it boots on the ground activity? Is it lobbying? Is it governmental work? Like take us through what the Western Bear Foundation actually does.
Yeah, so for our strategy, kind of going to market strategy, I guess, and what we've found works for us in the past because we don't have a ton of money is boots on the ground is fundamental for us, and then project funding and finding the right projects to fund, and a lot of that's going to go into in the future more research and science stuff rather than we do a lot of conflict mitigation with the grizzly bears projects in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. Um, as far as lobbying, we don't go to legislation and lobby a lot because a lot of the bear issues are commission based decisions in a lot of these states. And Game and Fish manages our wildlife. And so what we do, the Game and Fish commissions are a lot more approachable. You can talk to these folks all year around and they're not making decisions, without you being able to talk to them. And so we work a lot with the Game and Fish commissions when things come up for bear hunting seasons, season setting, regulations, anything affecting bears and bear hunting. In California, we got on board and blasted it out, reached out to all the senators and Congress people, and we'll do that stuff too. We'll write letters and we'll rally troops, and we did a big part of that with our membership. But for us, our wheelhouse is really on the ground stuff, doing boots on the ground. Right now we're doing a black bear research project in Wyoming with the University of Wyoming and the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. We're gonna have a better understanding. We're calling them black bears, and we're getting their data, and we're going to put out just a short brief. We're going to put out hair snares off of that collar data, and we're going to collect individual hair and get DNA. We're going to figure out their vulnerability during hunting season so we can understand patterns. It's pretty cutting edge stuff. It's new out here, and we're really happy to be involved with that. And we're doing a bear spray giveaway in Idaho. That's about $10,000 worth of bear spray, that we're giving away to sportsmen, people that have a hunting and fishing license that live and recreate in that area around Island Park and eastern Idaho, where there's a lot of conflict with grizzly bears. And then in Montana, a lot of our work has been through conflict mitigation, electric fences, trying to secure stock and food and garbages and stuff to try and keep more bears on the landscape so we can all enjoy them, whether it be hunting, photography, whatever. That's kind of our mission is, less bears getting killed by game and fish people and more bears on the landscape for us to enjoy. And now in Washington, we have a really strong membership base there. And we have a gal working with the department now that I know, and we're hoping to get some things going on there. That's research based. And so just trying to build it out everywhere. We're really opportunistic to where if someone reaches out to us, is like, hey, we want to do this. We're going to try and figure out a way to get you money or find a way to help out. And it might be a small stake at the beginning, and then we just grow off of that. And so that's kind of what we've done because we're all volunteer. We don't get paid. We don't have the people on the ground raising money, but we have the people on the ground that are willing to help go out for an hour or go out for 10 days or whatever and help do projects. And so that's what we've really tried to do a lot of. On the other side of things, excuse me, advocating for bear hunters is a big part of what we do. So looking at state laws, regulations, season settings, sorry about that, and always make sure we have a voice for bear hunters, because sometimes that stuff goes through the cracks, right? People don't pay attention enough, and bear hunters don't pay attention enough to things that are going to maybe affect their sport. And so things get passed that they don't know about, and then it's too late, because once they take one thing, you'll never get it back. And so we try and create a network across the West of sportsmen and people that are on the lookout for changes and things that could affect bear hunting.
Yeah. What's your yeah,
frog in my throat.
It gets you every now and then. What is your take on hunting bears with dogs?
We've always kind of been down the path of, if it's legal and if it's a tool that can be used, we're all for it. I don't personally have a problem hunting bears with dogs. It's something I've always wanted to do. I've not done it yet. It's a tool in the toolbox. It can be very effective in harvesting a selective part of the species, whether it's adult males, because you get these bears in a tree and you don't have to harvest them, right? You can look up there and say, that's an adult male, I'm going to take it out of the population. We're not killing sows all the time. We shouldn't be with hounds. You can pass on a sow or a bear with cubs and let them go, when we can focus our efforts on adult males. And so I think it's very selective. There are parts of the country where maybe it doesn't work out great because the terrain doesn't lend itself that way, or there's too much private land, because it's tough to run hounds when there's a lot of private land, because you got dogs crossing large tracts of people's land, and if you don't have permission. So it has its issues, but I think it's worked well in Idaho, where it's very popular. They got a lot of bears there, and they got a lot of terrain that's hard to spot and stock hunt. And so hounds have been a good tool that the departments use to keep populations down. And they also use it in the summer for conflict mitigation. These guys are running hounds in training seasons, and it's keeping bears away from populations and from houses and farms and ranches, and they can utilize that for conflict mitigation.
Yeah, I find it really interesting. I have never experienced hunting behind a dog other than upland bird. And what I know about hunting behind a dog is that it is an art form unto itself. And
very much so.
These animals are doing what they love. Like
Yep.
the whatever I don't know what type of dogs it is that chase down these bears, uh, but they're doing it because that's what they want. Like they're hungry for it. And so I have no issue with that at all. I talked to my wife this spring. I was like, "Oh, babe, I would love to go to Idaho and spring bear hunt since I didn't draw a Washington spring bear tag and got some buddies over there at Initial Ascent Backpacks. And I was like, hey, would you guys be willing to let us come hunt your bait pile?
Mm-hmm.
I've never done it before. I'm not even sure how I really feel about it. However, I told my wife, and she's like, no way, I'm not eating that bear. I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, that's not hunting. And I was like, ooh, here we go. We started talking about it. The interesting thing is it's, I would say, if you know how to find huckleberries in the mountains and you can find them, you can find a berry patch and you can get a place where you can glass that berry patch, and if you can wait there long enough, you're gonna find a bear.
Yep.
In the lowland with the big Himalayan blackberries and all this stuff where you can't glass, that is a different type of hunting that
Yep.
is not. It's like that's where people are like, well, I can't hunt bears very effectively, or I've never seen one, or I've never shot one. So does the baiting come into play more into the heavy terrain areas, or what's your view on that?
It's a little bit of both. So hounds and bait, they're typically used in areas like that where it's a little tougher to harvest spot and stock ways because of cover. And bears are love to live in the deep dark forest or undercover, and they can hide in 3 feet of bush, and you never see them. So, in Wyoming and Idaho, you can bait, and it's been very effective in managing populations in some of those areas. I would say Idaho, it's more beneficial just because the population of bears is so high, and bait is very effective in limiting them. And then there's some areas where there's a lot of bears, and they're killing bears over bait. I know guys that hunt over there, and they kill 4 or 5 bears every year on different baits, and the population doesn't sway at all. It is just it's very robust, and so bait offers another tool for people to be very selective because you got trail camera pictures. Anyone now probably does. You can study the animal, why it's there, rather than spot and stock. Sometimes it's a rush shot, it's at a great distance where you don't know if you're shooting at a boar or a sow, or if the bear is an adult boar or if it's a young bear, and so it allows you to be very selective. And bait's very polarizing. Both bait and hounds are, and I see infighting within bear hunting on it a lot. I actually field a lot of calls and emails about people that are houndsmen complaining about spot and stock guys, and spot and stock guys complaining about bait guys and houndsmen. And I'm like, listen, you guys are all bear hunters, man.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of country out there we got to get along. And I was never I'm a spot and stock guy. That's what I grew up doing. But I started learning that in Wyoming a long time ago. And I moved here, you could bait. And I said, well, I'm not going to not try it. I get a chance to be around bears and bear hunt even more.
Yeah.
What I found with baiting was it allowed me to be more of a student of the species when I baited. I learned more about bears baiting them than I did spot and stock hunting over a long period of time. In a few short years of baiting bears, I learned more about them than I ever would have spot and stock hunting. You just really have to understand them more, and then you can bait bears, but there's one thing to bait them and there's another thing to harvest bears over bait. It's not like everyone thinks. It's a lot of dang work. I was thinking about it today. It cost me more money to run baits. I do both here, and a lot of the baits are we do it for kids and new hunters to try and get them involved in the sport, because it's not so much running around in grizzly country trying to find bears. We're in an area where there's no grizz, and they can learn about the species more. But it costs me more to do that, more time. And we don't harvest a ton over bait, because you're looking for that mature bear, and they're dang smart, and it's a lot of work. And so I've always kind of been of the school where if it's legal and you can do it, I say go for it and give it a try. And a lot of people that are against bait would never try it just because they would never allow themselves to be wrong. That it's a
Yes.
lot harder, and it's not as easy as it looks.
Well, and that is, people are so quick to rush to a judgment call rather than
Yep.
actually experiencing something and then having that experience to speak from.
Yep.
Experience will always trump an opinion every day.
Yep.
It doesn't matter how strong of an opinion someone has until they have an experience, they can't speak to it. And that's, I think, an issue with this world. Is that's why I am such a proponent for hunter recruitment and mentorship, is I understand not everyone's meant to be a hunter. However, if everyone has an experience of it, like yesterday. So my wife, I mentored two hunters last year. What they actually, ironically, actually no, I mentored three hunters, but two of those were on bear hunts. One was a spring hunt, one was a fall hunt, and my fall hunt mentee was a guy who I met 6 months prior, and he wanted to get into hunting. He wanted to get into the self-sustaining lifestyle and the homesteading, and so our families became friends. And so they just started raising meat chickens. And my wife, she's like, "Oh man, I would love to start eating more organic, like
Hmm.
identify where your meat comes from." But there's not many opportunities for me currently where I'm eating anything other than red meat because,
Yeah.
all your game animals, for the most part, unless they're birds, are red meat. And so she was like, "Okay, I want to raise meat chickens." And so yesterday was the harvest. Yesterday was butcher day. And I talked to her. I was like, "Listen, if you want meat chickens, you also need to be willing
To take.
to kill them, to take them."
Yep.
And it went down yesterday, and I documented it. I got some great photos, and I'm so glad I did. But I talked to her today about it, and I was like, "So, what did you think?" And she was like, I don't know. She's like, I didn't really enjoy it, but I understood it. And we also ended up cooking one of the chickens that night for dinner. And she's like, it felt so good to eat that meat and to
Yeah.
know where it came from. And I was like, yes, now you understand what it's like to be a hunter, and that every single bite of that food, doesn't matter what game animal it is, when you take a bite of that meat, you're like, "Oh, this," so much that went into that. Y-
Yeah, and it's not uncommon for and I I go through it, that feeling she had of like I really don't know how I feel about it. And there are times when especially the older I get, I'm more aware, I think, and I'm more in my mind on when I harvest something. It's not always that like, yes, I did it, I have those moments of kind of solemn feeling of like I just took a life, and did I need to? And then I go right to do I need to make sure that I honor this thing by taking as much meat as I can, and we eat it, and we, but I would say, 15 years ago I didn't have that. And so that's an interesting progression, and it seems like that's almost going back to the beginning of hunting when I first started hunting as a kid. A horrific first hunting experience where my dad killed a deer and it didn't go down right away, and it was making all this noise, and I was like 8 years old crying, and I almost didn't hunt. That was traumatic for me. And then, you know early on you're like, oh, I killed something, but you're so young you don't really understand it. And then getting to the point I am now where you're like, I just took something's life, and then you start appreciating the species even more. And you're almost like, it's not turned me into a trophy hunter, but I'm a lot more selective. I don't need to just go kill to kill.
Yeah, there's this progression in a hunter's life. And I was talking to Robbie Kroger of Blood Origins about this, and he was like, "Yeah, every hunter, when they
Yep.
start hunting, if it's brown, it's down. If it flies, it dies." And
Fill
then,
in tags, man. Fill in
yeah,
tags.
and then you reach this point where, and I think a lot of it, at least for me personally, has to do with the meat in my freezer. If I have meat in my freezer,
Yep.
then I know that, like, going into this year, I know I'm not in such a dire need to have to kill something. I want to see other people fill
Yep.
tags. Last year, I was blessed to be able to fill all my tags, which was, an
Hmm.
experience all in itself. But I have so much meat now that I'm like, okay, I don't need to kill something. And at the same time, it's like, okay, now I want to hold out for a really mature animal, or now I really,
Yeah.
and it's not always like that, but that's just my experience, and I think that is the progression to the point where it gets to a point where you don't even need to kill anymore. If you have the
No.
food, if you have the meat, obviously that is important because I do it to feed my family. With that being said, like I don't even need to squeeze a trigger. I told my buddy yesterday. This is the mentee, Will Weber, just a phenomenal human being. Took him on this bear hunt back in August, and we were having a deep conversation. He's like, "So what's next for Washington Backcountry and the Soulful Hunter and all this?" And I was like, man, I could walk away from hunting right now.
Yeah.
I've helped people fill their first game tags. I've reached a level of knowledge that I feel like I'm confident, proficient. I still love hunting and I will always love it. And I also feel like I don't ever need to do it again. Um,
Hmm.
it's really fascinating, this progression that's happened within the last 5 years, 6 years.
A short amount of time for you. I think what you would find is you would need something to fill that space. I don't think it's necessarily the food, but I think down deep you would need that challenge. That trying to overcome something, being out there pitted against one on one, and trying to. That's something that is like you can't explain that to a lot of people. That drive is in there, and it's like I said, that's a primal feeling for people. Like I'm so happy to go out and take other people, and I don't care if I pull the trigger. And granted, I've been there where there's years are we're getting pretty low, and I got a cow tag, and I'm like out there meat hunting, you know. And there's a lot of times where I'm not. And now that my daughter's hunting and she's helping fill the freezer, I'm just happy to be out, you know. And I go on a lot of trips with a lot of guys where I don't carry a gun, you know, and I'm almost happier doing that. But I'm out there, I'm challenged, I'm experiencing hunting, but it's not me pulling the trigger, and I have as much joy doing that as I do actually pulling the trigger.
Yeah, it's fascinating, man. I can't, and this is why my mission of mentorship is conservation. Like, guys, girls, ladies and gentlemen, open your eyes to what this world offers.
Yeah.
And when there are times like, well, it says in the Bible, there are seasons, and there's the season of life, right? And so if your freezer is not empty, then you can really focus on that opportunity to start including others, to
Yep.
teach others, That way you don't feel like, well, they might ruin my hunt or I might not be able to dedicate enough stuff to them. There's always opportunities to give, which then leads me back into the Western Bear Foundation, which is why I wanted to have you on this podcast and talk, is there's always opportunities to get involved,
Hmm.
whether it's financial, whether it's with your time, with your energy. Um, it's important. You can never outgive good. You're never going to outgive good. And getting involved in an organization that is supporting and defending the thing that you love, there's no greater joy than like knowing that you're actually contributing to a difference. And one of the things I love about you, Joe, is that you hold a full-time job and you're the founder of Western Bear Foundation, because you're not taking a salary of $200,000 or, all these different things. You're
It's
in,
been very important for us, and we've said this for a long time. Like when money starts getting involved, people start doing things for the wrong reasons. Even though their intentions were good in the beginning, money can change people. And so we thought that if we didn't do this and get paid, then we'd always be in it for bears and bear hunters and never in it for ourselves, which is the most important thing. And when we're doing things as a foundation, we're always very cognizant of our membership and the people that have given time and money and resources, and would they be proud of this decision, or would they want us to do that? And so we're very much a family in that respect, where there are times going to come up in the world of bear hunting that things might not jive, like people in Wyoming might not want us to be pro take your meat out of the field, but at the end of the day, it's all good for the sport and for hunting. And that's an important thing that we've always said, we'll do it for the right reasons when money's not involved. And so none of us have ever taken a dime. We've always done it volunteer, and that's important to us as a foundation.
Totally, totally. And I also want to say this, I've had multiple conversations with people and very wise conversations where as I've explored the conservation organizations and all this pro hunting, I'm like, where do we start? And a lot of people they said, well, start with the Second Amendment. They're like, if you don't have weapons, and if you don't have the means to defend yourself against tyranny, you're not going to have the ability to hunt because at the end of the day, they're going to control you, and that's that.
Yeah.
And so you start there, whether you like the NRA or another thing, and then you drop down a level, and it's like, okay, who's just pro hunting? And I am a huge fan of Sportsman's Alliance, not only
Yep.
because they stand for hunting, but they stand for trapping. And
Yes.
and that is like, dude, talk about
It's going away. You got big nonprofit hunting organizations that are taking a step back, and like we are so hook and bullet. It's not even funny. Like a lot of us trap that are on this board. I'm a trapper, and so it's like when trapping and hound hunting become an issue, we're like right there to support anyone we can and make sure that we'll go to fight with you one day and know that you're going to have our backs another day. And we can't lose one thing because it's just going to steamroll. We lose trapping in New Mexico. That's just a disaster down there. They're losing trapping on public land in New Mexico.
Yeah.
And they got one state and they're not going to stop. And once trapping's done, they'll go to bears. And predators are always the early ones, But
It's easy, low-hanging fruit, right?
Disney's changed it. They see bears and lions on Disney movies and they think they're all cuddly and fun, and it's easy because we're not as organized. And that's a challenge that we have as sportsmen.
Yeah. And so I love that. I also just got my trapper's license this year. I tried my hand at trapping bobcat unsuccessfully. Got him on camera, got him in front of the cage, but they did not.
Well, you guys got a live trap there, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's even another, like, trapping was a huge. It took me 3 or 4 years of teaching myself before I ever caught a bobcat, and I never sold that thing. It's on the rug down here in my office. And I'm like, that thing was a prize for me. I was so proud of myself. But, that's another great way to learn about animals and the environment is trapping. Like you become a student of what your prey is more so than you ever would like calling them.
Yeah. No,
Become a trapper if you want to learn about something.
Oh man, that's good advice right there. So taking it down to the third level is critter clubs. What critter speaks to you? Are you a waterfowl hunter? Or do you like elk? Do you like deer? Do you like this concept of the once in a lifetime hunts with mountain goats and sheeps? And going through this, I was like, dude, I don't really, nothing calls to me like bears.
Yes.
And so I reached out to Clay Newcomb because I was like, Clay, is there a bear hunting organization? And he's like, oh yeah, Western Bear Foundation. And I was like, why have I never heard of this before? and no, it's not to shame on you or your organization, but this is the point, is that the word needs to get out there that there are organizations that will stand with you for the animals that you love. And if you are listening to this podcast and you're like, wow, it's a really good point. I like everything that Joe's saying and standing for. Then even if you are a bear hunter, whether you've killed one or not, pursued them or not, you might really, and I strongly urge you to consider joining and becoming a member of the Western Bear Foundation.
Well, one big thing too with us is I've always taken pride on. Sometimes I fault myself for always saying yes, but when you call the Western Bear Foundation, you call my cell phone. And I've honestly talked to more people about how to hunt bears than I have about the membership, and I enjoy it. And that's why I'm here. That's why we did this. It's not only about like getting people to sign up, but it's just getting people interested in the sport and having more bear hunter advocates. And I've talked to a lot of people over the course of the years that are like, I don't know how to do it and I need help. And it's like, okay, where are you at? And I'm not an expert, but I can give you the help that I didn't have when I started. That's a big thing for us. And on our board's always accessible. Like we're always there for the sportsmen. And that's always been important to us too. Like never so big that we can't answer the phone or give a call back or return an email. And that's a big part of our foundation as well.
Yeah, so cool. And you guys aren't chapter based, which is something we talked about earlier prior to this. But it's something that you're potentially considering to make sure you
Yes.
get more boots on the ground in each state.
Yeah, and I think we've been looking at it for years, and we actually have a lawyer in the works of trying to figure out, like chapter charters and stuff. It is something we want to do, and we will have in the future. Because what my goal is to have the advocates for bears and bear hunting on the ground in their area because they know best there. A chapter in Washington is going to know more of the Washington issues than me in Wyoming trying to figure out what's going on in Washington, and the same for Virginia or Idaho or Montana or Colorado. Each state has its own issues. And our goal is to have chapters that are basically raising money for their own chapter and working for the foundation and for their state chapter there locally. And then it would give a lot it'd free up some of my work and trying to be in every state and do everything when you have guys that know more than I do on the ground there representing the chapter and the foundation. So
Yeah,
it's just been we trying to go like almost at a snail's pace so we make the good decisions and not the like hurry up ones. And it's been frustrating at times because I want to go, go, go. And we've been trying to hold ourselves from making hasty decisions or reacting too fast and make sure that when we do something, it's for the right reasons and it makes sense.
bingo. Slow is smooth, and
Yes,
smooth is fast.
that's right. That's a military term there.
Uh-huh. So I mean, yes, Rome wasn't built in a day. There are things that need to take place, and yet it's going to happen. And
Yep,
Western Bear Foundation is going to be there to stand for bear hunters and
that's
people
right.
and sportsmen. So I think it's really fascinating. I do want to say this because if you are hearing this podcast and you go to westernbearfoundation.org and you start poking around on the website, first off, Western Bear Foundation stands for all bear hunters in America. It's not like
Not
just
just the West.
you're right. And then when
The Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation does stuff for elk all over the United States. We do the same thing for bears all over the United States.
yes, I just want to clear that up. The other thing is and no offense, Joe, that I don't want to feel like I'm throwing you under the bus or whatever. But when you start poking around the website, there are some things that kind of throw you for a loop, such as when you go to the About Us page and it talks about Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana. Well, there's a lot more information and support out there than just what's on the website. And I think a lot of this contributes to the fact that when you call Western Bear Foundation, they get your cell phone rather
Yeah.
than it being like, well, get my secretary or talk to the vice president or all these different things or my media person. And so, for example, like the Bear Facts, it's not going to work. I'm clicking on it right now and it says, oops, there's an error.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. It's a product of being all volunteer and time. And, we manage our own website. And, so there's a lot of things that we are still working on and getting built out. And I mean, I think for us, it's always been like, we'll show you. We might not be as flashy as all the others, but we'll bring it to the boots on the ground and we'll show you what we're about with what we do.
Absolutely. And I love that. And so when it comes to the membership, ladies and gentlemen, I actually feel like this is probably one of the best deals in a membership for an organization that you can get. $30 for a year. You get a decal. You get a 1-year subscription to Bear Hunting Magazine, which if you caught the May and April edition of 2021, you might be able to see this wonderful face all over that.
It was
That's
a great article, by the way.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun. And then discounts in the online store. But to be a life member of the Western Bear Foundation, this is where I was like, dude, this is a killer deal. $500.
Yeah.
And there's payment plans available for that lifetime membership. That's
Yeah.
huge.
And you get, our friends at Stone Glaciers helped us out a ton. And you get a Stone Glacier pack with your $500 membership. You get a jacket and a hat, and there's payment plans. And so, pretty good way to get in. We actually have, I think we have with our membership, it's about a third of our membership are life members. So that shows me a lot that people have bought into our cause, because you go through the years where you get one, you lose one on the yearly, but when you get life members, that means they're vested in what you guys are doing, and so it's pretty cool, and it's a great deal.
I totally agree, and I can't wait to make my lifetime membership purchase. This is the first time that no joke. It's not about what I'm receiving in return. You are the first organization that I'm like, okay, not only financially could I swing it on the wife's permission, the concept,
Yeah.
where I'm like, okay, well, I have a rifle scope I want to sell, and that rifle scope will pay for my lifetime membership. I'm like, okay, then that's easy for me to get behind. And I want you guys to understand that your money goes where your heart is.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We spend our money where our heart is. And if you truly care about hunting, and I'm not pressuring people, and I'm not saying you should, because everyone's life choices are your own. And if you care about bears and bear hunting and seeing it last for generations to come, get involved, become a member, and let's do this, and let's make an impact and leave a legacy for generations to come.
That's the most important for the people ahead of us. We can't just think about ourselves.
Yep. There's too many selfish people in this world. It's time to start thinking about others. Joe, I've really, really appreciated this conversation. On top of going to westernbearfoundation.org, what are other ways in which people can get involved or get connected or get plugged in?
Yeah, so we do all the social media, Facebook, Instagram. We have a Twitter page or account. And so those are big ones to see, because I don't update the website as often, but you can see everything we're doing on Facebook or Instagram as far as projects, fundraisers, anything we're doing, call to actions. The biggest thing for call to actions is if I have your email, you'll get blasts from us saying, hey, and like this deal in California, it didn't have to be Californians that were involved. It was every one of our membership were sending emails and writing. And so we have that luxury, and that's what we're trying to build, is a database of bear hunters that can fight for each other. And so that's a big part of becoming a member, is being involved with the emails and understanding what's going on across the country, not just where you live.
Heck yeah. I will say this, that Western Bear Foundation's logo is dropping on the Soulful Hunters website, and you are an organization that we will proudly stand with and stand behind.
Well, that means a lot. Thank you very much, because you guys do your due diligence, and I got to commend you on your podcast, and just the philosophy that you guys have and you have about bringing new people in is so important to me and to our foundation. So it's a great thing to see.
I love it. Joe, thank you so much. Listeners, I hope you really enjoyed this episode and you are inspired to take action in your own life and to stand up not only for what you love and believe in, but stand up for the people who don't know, that are indifferent because of a lack of knowledge. And it's so important not only for us to monetarily take action, but to educate ourselves and to own your own knowledge so that we can stand and speak in defense of the things that we love. Because if we can't speak without a voice, who's there to speak? I go back to Martin Niemöller of World War II. It says, first they came for the Bolsheviks, but I wasn't a Bolshevik so I didn't say anything. And then they came for the trade unionists, but I didn't say anything because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I wasn't a Jew, so I didn't say anything. And then they came for me, and there's no one left to stand and say something. And so it's time to take a stand in what you believe. And if you don't know what you believe, then let's start there and let's get down to it. If you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you really enjoyed this episode. I'm Johnny Mac. Freedom on, and stay soulful. If you enjoyed today's podcast, I'd love it if you could go ahead and give this a rating as well as subscribe. Also, you can check us out on Instagram under the Soulful Hunter Podcast. Make sure to tag us in pictures and posts and use the hashtag Soulful Hunter. To find out more about the Soulful Hunter Podcast, go to soulfulhunter.com and be sure to follow the podcast, as we are going to be bringing you a lot of great information, insight, and changing lives through primal adventure. I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. Stay tuned and stay soulful.